Señor, abre mis labios y mi boca proclamará tus alabanzas. Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. Amen. Well, there was an extraordinary event that happened this week. How many of you are familiar with the term Brexit? Yes. So we had this huge event, and Maureen and I were rather disappointed in the outcome. So we decided that to kind of sort of take our mind off the situation. Oh, for those of you who don't know, Brexit is Britain's vote to exit the European Union. Anyway, they voted for it. So we were kind of sad about it, and we decided to go see this mindless movie called Central Intelligence. It was, we needed a laugh. And so in this one scene, the two guys are in this little twin-engine plane, and they're taking a nosedive, and they're heading straight for the ground. And so the pilot says to one guy, "What do you regret?" I mean, they're plunging to their death. And so he says, "What do you regret most? What's your biggest regret in life?" And he says, and the other guy is screaming. He just, all he can think about is that they're about to hit the ground, and he's just screaming. He goes, "No, really, what's your biggest regret?" And he's looking at him and it's screaming, and he goes, I don't know. And he says, "No, really, you've got a few seconds before we splat. Can't you think of one thing that you regret having not done?" And then finally he says, "Okay, I regret that I never had a child with my wife." And so then the other guy pulls up the plane. He goes, "Okay, see, that wasn't so hard. Now you know what's really important." Well, what we're talking about in today's gospel is that we have to prioritize. This is what Jesus is saying to his followers, that you make a choice, you make a commitment. So there's a lot of sayings on the internet about that. And one of them says that the difference between interest and commitment. When you're interested in something, you do it when circumstances permit. But when you're committed to something, you accept doing it no matter what. You're interested in the results. You're committed to the outcome. So you accept no excuses. So being interested in something is not the same thing as being committed to something. When you're committed, that's what your priority is. And sometimes we have a hard time determining what our priorities are. I don't suggest taking a nosedive in a plane to find that out. There are other ways of doing that. Other ways of determining what is it that's really important in our lives. And in our complicated lives, it's often very difficult. One could say, especially to those of you who are here, and especially to those of you who are regularly here, that I'm kind of sort of preaching to the choir, so to speak, because you're normally here. And so there's a sense of commitment that you have about your faith, about your relationship to God. For people who are new to the church, it's harder. I took a course online last week, and it was on how do we do at welcoming and maintaining our connection to visitors. Now, every Sunday in our church, we have anywhere from 2 to 3 visitors every week. Somebody who has come who hasn't ever been here before. And so over a 52-week year, you can do the math, and we have well over 100 people, 150 you could say, that come through our doors. Now, of those 150, we generally speaking retain about 10%. Well, that sounds kind of dismal, doesn't it? 10%? But actually, as church figures go, that's pretty good. However, should we be satisfied with that? Should we say, okay, that's good enough? We're doing better than a lot of churches. But so this course, what this course is saying is that, well, let's try to do better. And so they did research and so forth. And I used to do congregational development for the Diocese of New York. And I attended lots of conferences and seminars and so forth about church growth and that kind of thing. And in those days, this is over 10 years ago now, there was this understanding that the research showed that the number one thing that people look for in a church is what? Do you remember what it was? Parking. Parking. That's what the research showed all those years ago. Well, fast forward to just last week, and so what these guys are saying is that maybe that's not the right question to ask. Maybe we have to reframe the question, because to tell you the truth, having 150 or so people coming through our doors every year, brand new, who had never been here before, that's a high number. So maybe the problem isn't them getting here. The problem is them coming back. How do you get them to come back? And so then the question is, for those of you who didn't come back, why did you not come back? That's a different kind of a question. It's a little bit harder to answer. But these folks get paid to do research and so forth, and so they have an answer. And we have actually experienced this in Noisy Mass. The answer as to why, now, we in the church are tempted to blame for not coming back. What's the number one reason we think that people don't come back? Music. They didn't like the music. They didn't like the preaching. People didn't talk to them. We weren't warm and friendly. All of these reasons are things that we're used to saying, that this is why people don't come back to us. And yet, there was a time in our church when we would get information from people who were visitors, and Don, our intrepid deacon, would faithfully call these folks just about the very day that they visited. He would call them and have a conversation with them about what did they think about the church. And they invariably said, how warm and welcoming and how wonderful everything was and so forth. So it's not, what happens here is not the problem. So what the research now says is the reason that people don't come back is that life gets in the way. It's not that they don't want to come back. It's that they're not used to being here. And so it's harder for them to remember to get here. So Noisy Mass, we go through this ebb and flow. And in the early time when we first started, we'd have one family, two families, sometimes no families. And so I got a little worried, and so I'd send out surveys and make phone calls and stuff, like, should we change the time? Is the content wrong? I mean, what is it? How can we help you get here? And they were like, no, don't change anything. We love Noisy Mass. Please keep making it happen, because this is really perfect for us. We love that we don't have to worry about our kids, and it's a short service, and it's really very meaningful even to the parents. Please don't change a thing. So, I'd be stymied. It's like, well, then what? Well, this is what the research shows. It's that it's not a habit. It's not a part of the routine. It's not a commitment. They're interested, they want it, but they haven't committed to it. So this webinar that I attended also asked the question, how long should we follow people after we get information from them? How long do we keep up following them along? And we normally, when we get the information, we normally contact them like either the same day or within 2 or 3 days. We'll send an email, thanks for visiting, so glad you were here, here's what we do, hope to see you again. And and then we wait. Well, take a guess. How many weeks should we be following up with people according to the new data? Take a guess. At the early service, somebody said 40 days and 40 nights. Well, the data shows that we're supposed to follow them for 6 weeks. We have to have a 6-week follow-up. So this is a new thing for us. This is not the habit that we have. We're interested in it. Are we committed to it? Shall we change how we do things because we're committed to helping people feel a part of this church? And one of the other things that we learned was, everybody wants a friendly church. But that's not what people are looking for. People are not looking for a friendly church. They're looking for a friend. That's different. So we can be warm and welcoming and be friendly, but people are looking for relationship. People are looking for connection. And that would mean that we have to make an extra effort to find out more about that person, to know what is it that person is about, and to truly begin to care about this person. And that doesn't happen easily. We have to make that commitment. We have to say that we know and understand how important that is. And we're willing to put ourselves out there. So commitments are those things that kind of shape who we are. Like, all of us have things that are important to us. And we do a whole lot of things. But if we were to prioritize them, if I gave you index cards and you wrote down one important thing to you on all of these index cards, and then I told you, okay, now put them in order. What's number one? Put that card first. What card would that be? Do we know what that card would be? How long would it take us to figure out, unless we were plunging down to the earth and only had a few seconds to think about it? I mean, what would that card be? That number one thing. And are we committed to that? Well, the gospel today is giving us a challenge. The gospel is saying, make God first. Make God first. Make your relationship to God first. Everything else flows from that. All of our other commitments, priorities, everything else will fall into place once we get that one thing right. Once we're committed to that one thing. This is the promise that God makes. That we make that commitment, everything else flows. So we have to make our own commitment to God, our own commitment to following the gospel, to living out the teachings that God has taught us through Jesus. In St. Augustine's writings, in reference to this gospel, he is saying, this is not about literally ditching your parents and not loving them. It's not about that. We can't take this literally. It's not that that's not important, to love and honor your parents and all of that. It's what order is it in? What order is our love and commitment in? So we should not use God as a reason to not fulfill other things that are important too. But this is why the promise is that if you put God first, all of these other things fall into the correct order. They will find their level of importance based on what we put as number one. Great organizations demand a high level of commitment. by the people involved. This is what Jesus is asking us, is to make Jesus the number one commitment. And believe and trust in the promise that once we do that, that everything else will fall into place. It takes a long time to build in a new habit, a new way of seeing things. Some studies say that you have to do something 7 times or something like that before it kind of takes. There's lots of studies that say one thing or another about it, but the one thing that is in agreement is that you have to commit to doing it. It's like you want to do an exercise plan, and the first 2 or 3 times you're out there and you're doing it, and then all of a sudden there's a reason not to go and you don't go. Or you start a diet and you're doing okay for that first meal, and then by the second meal, well, no, that's me. I'm sure others have bigger bigger willpower than that. The point being that you have to commit to a certain level of time to get into the habit, to get into the rhythm of what it is that God is asking us to do. Commitment is good for the church, but it's also good for you. It's first of all good for you. And when it's good for you, the way God intends you to live your life, if it's good for you in that way, then it's going to be good for the church. It's going to be good for your family. It's going to be good for your work life. It's going to be good, period. So trust in that. Believe in that. Make God first. Make that first card your relationship to God. Amen.